Welcome to the Archway of Hope podcast. My name is Chip Wilson, and I will be your host, where we cover things from loss, grief, and providing hope for those who have lost someone too early. Well, today what we want to talk about is something that I think is very interesting because for someone like myself, all of us, you have a close friend or an acquaintance or loved one that loses someone. What do you say? You hear a lot of the common catchphrases, and I guess people just repeat them, but that's not always the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. And so today, let's talk about some of the things that you should or maybe you should not say to someone who just lost someone too early.
Mm-hmm. Yes, this is a very hot topic whenever I have people that come in and talk about things that have happened and their grief. One of the things that they always bring up are, you will not believe what so-and-so said to me. And I'm like, oh yeah, what was that? I want to know too, because you know what I'm doing? Okay, what not to say to a person that's grieving, what not to say the second you step foot in, right? And it's interesting because everybody grieves differently and feels differently and experiences their grief differently, and also their background, religiosity, even political. I mean, you would not believe the kind of things that come into play, people's family systems and their prior beliefs and what they've been through and experiences, and all of that comes to a head in the moment that somebody opens their mouth to tell somebody basically that they're sorry that they've experienced a loss. And so I'm interested in knowing a little bit from you, Jimmy, what is that like for you when you think back to the things that people said to you, and out of those things, when you filter them, the what not to say to somebody.
So we can kind of have a little bit of fun with it.
Right.
That's a little bit how I feel now. Again, 7.5 years removed, I can look back and laugh about it a little bit. And I've hoped that I've learned to extend some grace to people, because I really believe they all meant well. But man, some of the things people can say are just stupid as hell. I mean, it's just some dumb stuff.
Did any stand out to you? And you don't have to use names of who said them.
Yeah. Please don't use names of who said it.
Oh, they'll be common.
We don't want to know who wore it best, right?
Lots of people say the same things.
So, there are you hear a lot of them over and over, and I'll throw the most common ones out. But when you ask the specific question of, can you remember a person or absolutely. So, and again, I won't even say the setting I was in, because it'd probably give it away. But I loved this person. It was a lady. Loved her. We worked together on occasion from time to time, and Red had been dead maybe 6 weeks or whatever. And getting back to Christy's point, when you mentioned religiosity.
Yeah, that's religiosity, right?
Okay, well, that's the worst when they roll it up in religion as if God said, And so she's trying to console me, and we were close. So she called me Jimbo. And she goes, Jimbo, God don't make no mistakes. It was Red's time. God knew what he was doing, bringing him home, and she just kept telling me that over and over, God don't make no mistakes. And I'm thinking to myself, woman, you don't know what in the hell you're talking about, because in this case, God made a mistake.
Yeah.
And so that's just one that always, and I think about that a lot. And again, I can have some grace for her because we love each other. We really do. Mm-hmm. She's an older lady. She's, I don't know, maybe 65, 70 years old. Fantastic person. We really have a great relationship. But that's all she knew to say. It was just several times is, God don't make no mistakes. He knew what he was doing.
And she probably believes that.
Yeah, she does believe that.
But she did not lose her son at 15 years old.
Yeah. And I knew her background. She had some bad things happen to her. Mm-hmm. But, and again, I would like to think that I was able to give some people some grace, because I knew, like this particular person, they really cared for me. But it's other times when people in different settings that they really, you don't have that kind of relationship. And so when they do tell you something that's just flat out stupid, you can wonder, was there an edge on that? Was there something behind that? And again, the thing that always makes it, I think, so much more difficult is when they wrap it in religion. I will throw this out, and then I'll kind of let you bat this around. But so Lauren and I, even recently, again, for those of you out there, I'd like to think that I have a fairly deep level of faith and my own relationship with God. And so we're all familiar with the scripture, Romans 8:28. All things work together for good for those who trust in the Lord and according to his purpose and will. We all know that. And so a lot of people like to use that when they're trying to comfort you. All things work together for good for those who trust in the Lord, as if somehow there was something good about Rhett dying.
Or that you're not trusting enough to understand
one
that.
or the other. Yeah. And both of them are terrible. And again, I'm not saying throw your religion out, or I don't believe in the Bible and I don't believe in the Word of God. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm just telling you, please refrain from telling someone, walking in with your quoted scripture, whether it's that one or 100 others, because I'm telling you, even 7.5 years later, yes, there have been some good things that have come out of Rhett's death. We have seen some positive things. Lauren and I talk about those regularly. But to say that all things have worked together for good from Rhett's death, not even close. To me, I think that's what heaven is made for. I really don't think that you're going to give me something or show me something that's going to be a replacement for Rhett here on this earth. In heaven, yeah, I can go there, but right now on this earth, that worked for good, and not buying that. So
it's more
really
meaningful to do your own spiritual work in that way and find scripture that's meaningful to you while you're journaling and meditating and thinking and healing than it is for people to shove verses down your throat and make you feel something from something they've felt or they've experienced.
Yeah, you're right. Even if that's what they experienced may not be any good for what I or you or anybody else has experienced. What's good for you is not good for everybody else, and that's part of the whole grieving process. But boy, the list is long, and we can talk about some more because some of them are kind of fun.
God needed another angel.
That's one of my favorites, by the way. Yeah. God needed another. First of all, if you really knew the Bible, which, again, not that I really do, but people are not angels. People don't ever become angels. Angels are their own different heavenly body. And so, first of all, that's not even biblically correct. And secondly, because I've been told that 100 times, because Rhett, okay, great kid. Was he an angel? No, he was not an angel. You've been told that a lot. And I'm thinking, man, if God is who we all believe he is, this infinite, omniscient, omnipresent being, he does not need another person with him. God is just fine without Rhett in heaven. He does not need another angel. My belief was the earth needed Rhett a whole lot more than heaven needed Rhett. So, again, axe that one from your list.
And his mom and dad and sister and brother needed him more.
Yeah.
Speaking of sister and brother, you have other kids, Jimmy.
Yeah. And then that's the other one. And Paul hit it right on is...
that was a good segue there, Paul.
Really
you almost had me. I was like, did he just say that? And then
because he knows we've had that conversation
what you were doing.
Before.
Wow.
They assume that you've got other kids. And what they really, I think, I've tried, again, trying to open up my mind to give them some grace is, okay, they know you've got other kids, so go live for your other kids.
That's the point, because I think that in my mind, well, okay, at least you've got other kids, which is something, but to say that, to voice that, that's
all they do. And and again, you've probably heard this, Christy, when they come to you and they say that, they're so hurt by that, as if, oh, well, I've got a couple of other kids, and I have, Rhett was the middle child, so I've got Ryan and Mara on either sides of Rhett, and so therefore I've got two others. Well, we'll be fine.
Yeah, I've got other shoes in the closet.
Yeah.
Put those on.
It seems ridiculous when we talk about it in that light, right?
Right? Yeah.
Well, how about he's in a better place?
God, Chip, how do you know these so well? Have you been using them?
I've been watching lots of.
He's been making a lot of mistakes. He's just not saying it.
A lot of documentaries made. I'm picking up on the ones not to say.
Yeah,
He's in a better place. I mean, let's just all think about that. Again, you're talking about Rhett, and he's in heaven. Okay, yeah, he is, but what about us? Okay, what about us down here on earth? It gets back to the whole religiosity. Or
Religiosity.
Yeah, I can't get that out. But
Religious
that's what
beliefs.
It is.
That's what you can say.
Religious beliefs. That's what it is. As if, and again, I know heaven's a great place, and I believe in that. But man, hey, what about us on here on earth, mom and dad?
Yeah.
What about our rights?
Like, thank you, Captain Obvious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In a better place. You get a lot of those.
Well, how about the I know exactly how you feel?
Yeah, that's
does anybody know exactly how you feel?
Nah, nobody does. So look, that's we're getting closer to something that is legitimate. I think about that a lot because as parents who've lost a child too soon, you now become a part of this really, hopefully narrow, small, and really bad fraternity. And so there is a whole lot of truth when we say we have some idea how those parents feel. I do. I have some idea. But to say I know how they feel or
how you feel.
Everybody is different, and you got to be really careful of how you phrase it. But I can tell you, Chip, you've had your own forms of grief that I know you've gone through, but you've not lost a child. So I can tell you bluntly, don't go to some parents and tell them, I know how you feel.
Right.
Because you don't even, and it becomes a really defensive place from parents like us. You immediately want to lash out, and it's almost like, well, that's the person who doesn't really love me, know me or care for me, because you know damn good and well you don't know how I feel. So why would you even say that?
So in their moment of trying to connect, what I hear you saying is it's an actual disconnect.
You got it.
Like immediate sever of that connection between two people.
Yeah, instead of being just a dumb comment, that sounds like an intentional comment.
Well, does it make it worse, Christy, when they say, I know exactly how you feel, and then go on to give an example that only makes it worse, not better?
You know, it's almost like every woman's birth story. As soon as somebody says I'm pregnant or I'm having a baby or I had a baby, they immediately go into, oh, well, this is what happened in mine, right? We all want to share. But what we need to stop and pause, talk about the pause, right, is to recognize that that person in this moment is the only story that really matters. Now, if you say to them, I would be happy to sit down someday and talk about the things that I've experienced, but I recognize that now's not the time. But when it is, please remember that I would be happy to hold that space with you. That would be the type of conversation you want to have, but I think it's because people are so uncomfortable with grief in our country, and that goes back to that quick, get over it, instantaneous gratification. We've got work to get done. We don't have time to sit and wallow in self-pity, right? You've got to look around and be thankful for all the things you have. But in that moment, you have nothing. Yeah, everything has been stripped from you.
Yeah, you hit on another one. Be thankful for all the things you have. And look, I am, okay? But there's a really big but that's now missing that has been just stripped from you. So forgive me if I don't feel thankful at the moment, okay? Or if I don't really ever want to feel thankful again.
And timeliness is an issue with this too, right? So in that moment, when you first have the traumatic incident, that's not the time for people to tell you to look around and be grateful. You don't really need that, right?
It's just
How about everything happens for a reason?
Yeah, that gets back to wrapping God on it, though. It really does, for a reason, as if, again, God orchestrated every move. And again, maybe he does, okay? I don't know. I don't really even want to have that conversation. I'm not God. You're not God. Don't try to cram your beliefs down on me to try to make me feel good, because that's everything happens for a reason. Because I guarantee you, those parents, there's no way that parents who have lost a child can wrap their mind around that. A reason? What would be the reason right now that my son or daughter would have been stripped out of this world? The reason? Nothing good.
Or there's something to be learned from this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to learn nothing in your university then,
Yeah.
or universe.
What about, and again, just thinking out loud here, if I didn't know what to say, but I had a friend who had a loss, and I come and say, I kind of understand. Let me tell you about my friend who had a loss and what we did and what helped him or her or so on and so forth. And I go on a long dissertation about another person I know that's had a similar loss.
Yeah, so we've touched on a couple of different things when you bring that out. So you've got the people that you don't really know, and you're going to have a short encounter. They're friends or acquaintances, and so the encounter is, maybe it's at the visitation, or maybe if it's at the funeral, or maybe it's in the grocery store, where you're going to have that short encounter. What do you say? Versus, as you just described, you've got that friend or someone you may need to have a conversation with, and you want to make yourself open to the conversation. How do you let them know that you have some inkling? So you got two different encounters there, and they're really, really different. Mm-hmm. So when I hear you ask that question, yeah, Chip, even being part of Archway now, I would venture to say that you've learned a whole lot about grief as you have interviewed these people. And you now have some idea of what to say, what to do. But even then, I would say, I have some idea. It's how you couch it. It's how you frame it. I have some idea. I've been around people. This is what we do. I'm not suggesting at all that any of their experiences are like yours. But if you need someone to visit with, or let me tell you what some of the things they've shared with me, maybe they're helpful, maybe they're not. Take what's good, throw out the rest. It really depends on the approach. And I will tell you that, again, obviously someone like Christy, who does this for a living, Paul, who's been around us, you who are now on this board, all of you have things to offer that really are helpful. But it's how you frame it going into it, if you really want to spend some time with someone and have them open up to you. Otherwise, you're going to shut that door.
And the timeliness of it, for sure. The timing is everything. Sometimes the pause is the very best thing, right? I think that this is kind of one of those subject areas in this, but I think it is important because it comes up often in sessions as well, that how about the person who is very close to the family or not, and they take the story on as if it is their trauma, their like immediate trauma, not just, I mean, you can be a very good friend and be very, very close to it, but if you are not mom, dad, grandparent, sibling, and you're a friend, but you're feeling this grief, and it supersedes the grief of the very people who are in the center of it.
That's good stuff.
That is something that I hear frequently. And then the other part of that is that the people on the outskirts that are like, oh yeah, I know them. And this is, and they're talking about it as if they are the very closest friends, like, your circle with Paul and them, you know what I mean? So then that's like another extension of that. But let's go back to the very beginning of that, which is the person who is grieving almost louder than you are. How do you deal with that?
Run. Really, get away from it.
Can't deal with that.
You cannot deal with that. Get away from it. And I think I could go on a rant about the abuse of social media in that. So where you see it a lot is maybe you've got that person that starts getting on social media about their trauma, their grief, their whatever from your loss. And you back up and go, wait a second, that's my loss and my child, and it's different for you. It's not your child. you just got to be really, really careful, really careful. But if you are experiencing that, just to get down to the nitty gritty as a parent, if you are experiencing that, run. If you don't have the nerve of the relationship to tell that person to just flat out stop, don't do that, then you need to run. You need to get away from that. Or if it's on social media, then you need to cut your Facebook off, one or the other, because that will run you down a bad, bad trail.
So that protectiveness comes into play again, right? Where you're like, oh no, we're going to circle the wagons, and you're going to be on the exterior of this space, this inner circle space. You, like, even if you were there before, the very best of best friends or whatever, or family members or so-and-so, it pushes you kind of like behind that wall for a little bit, because I can't even deal with who I am right now, much less deal with your grief about my child. And it sets the stage for how everybody heals together. It sets a stage for who you're going to remain connected with or disconnected with, because at some point your heart and mind cannot take anymore.
Yeah, I was going to say, you touched on something really important there. Instead of bringing the group closer, you can actually fracture relationships with that dynamic that you just described. Instead of making things better, you've just broken a relationship. And again, I'll give you an example, not necessarily of calling out people, but after Rhett died, we had lots of reacquaintances, old friends that we hadn't seen in a long time, which was, again, one of the good things that did come out of Rhett's death, some rekindled relationships. And, you can think back on the moments where they had picked up our story and heard our story, and then you're around them sometime later, and they begin to tell somebody else the story. And the story it became their story somehow, and they're recounting your story in a group of people, and you're going, it didn't happen at all like that. Nothing happened. Where did you pick up all these supposed details of things that, and again, it's just hard on relationships when that happens. And again, if you're the really good friend and you want to tell your story, great. Go tell your story. And if the family asks you, how did you find out? Because we've done that with Paul 100 times. How did you find out? If you're asked to tell that story, great. Or if you're telling that story to somebody else when those parents aren't around, great. But unless you've been given some sort of permission, don't start just telling the details and events of what happened in another group of people, because you'll leave the parents scratching their head.
And that, you hit on something there too, on the permissiveness of it. And so, like, that gatekeeper again. So, with those people that are very close to you and that are hurting as well, and they're needing to have some kind of expression of their grief, and they've been with you and they've been through life with you and things like that. But now all of a sudden their grief is overshadowing what you're experiencing. And so is that time for them to come in and say, may I post something on social media? Because that's a real thing nowadays that we didn't used to have to even think about. Can I, how should I? Would you like to approve before I do it? Or are you even in a space to be able to handle that? Do you appoint somebody to handle that? What happens then?
I don't know, but you're asking the right question. I mean, when I hear you say that, I'm thinking, well, that's an easy way to handle it. Can I? May I? Do you want to look at this first? Because, again, as a parent, you're thinking, well, I've got somebody out there that wants to say something about my child. Maybe it's to honor them, remember them, a funny story, which we all want as parents. That's part of what we do at Archway. It's the legacy pieces so your child is not forgotten. So I think what you just suggested is a great idea, is if you want to say something or do something, run it by the parents and say, hey, here's what I'd like to do. Is this permissible? Not in those words, but is this okay? And I'm sitting here thinking, even for Archway, that's what we do. We put out pieces in remembrance of people. And I'm thinking, you know what? Maybe we should be getting, if we don't, I don't know, I'm not the one who posts them, but maybe we should even be getting the okay from those folks. Is this okay if we highlight your child today because it's their, as we say, heaven day? When they died and went off to heaven. Yeah, that's a great point.
So I think it's important for us to talk about intent and people's intent. And a lot of the things that people say and they do, the intent hopefully is positive, but the consequence is negative. And in your situation with Rhett, financially you're in a position to not worry about the funeral costs and other stuff. But I see people that say, oh, so-and-so lost a child, I'm going to start a GoFundMe page for funeral expenses, or they have too much to worry about right now. I'm going to take it upon myself to go do certain things for them because the intent is right, but then maybe the consequence backfires. And how do we know what's right? How do we know what's wrong? No, I mean, I can tell you with the documentaries that we've been producing, there's people that have to go back to work right away. They just don't have a choice versus people that have the luxury of not having to go back to work. And does that change the way we approach grief, the way we look at their situation, things that we say to them? It's very confusing and tricky for if you've never experienced it.
Let me talk about intent for a second. As a friend, and you don't even have to be that close of a friend to somebody who has lost someone too early, but you have this thing in your heart and in your mind where there's got to be something I can say or do that makes this a little better. I think generally that's what most people have, even though we've heard examples of things that may not be as pure in the mind as others. But speaking as a past offender of, I've said stupid things before. There's two reasons you end up saying something stupid. One is you really do want to find something to say to make it just a little better. It is totally a righteous endeavor. The other one is you find yourself in a situation and you want to say something where the person who lost someone will reciprocate and make you feel better. Because it's such a lousy situation. It's so awkward. I'm going to say something and please bless it so I feel better and I can go on about my day and leave you where you are.
That's an interesting point.
I've done both. Absolutely have done both. Said something that's not too smart because I want them to feel better, and then said something in hopes that I could feel better.
Or because you want them to know that I'm here with you, and so I need you to remember that I was here with you and I said something profound.
Yeah, it's a selfish thing, but it's a human thing, I think.
Or I said just the right thing at the right time.
Right. I did it. I came through.
I did the thing I was coming here to do.
Yeah.
I supported them, right?
I promise I've done both of those.
Right.
I look back later, I'm going, oh, that was about me.
So I'm going to give you a really interesting dichotomy of what you just talked about, though. So one of the hardest things to do is to be in that moment in silence.
Say nothing.
Say nothing.
Hard.
But on the flip side, that's one of the best things you can ever do.
Yeah.
It really is. I remember going to a funeral when I was probably 12 or 13 years old, and my mom and dad, we had kind of gone around this trip before. My sister was killed in a car wreck, and I remember going to the funeral and of another person who had graduated from high school recently, and they were killed in a car wreck, and I was going to the funeral because I had a relationship with the parents. And I remember asking my mom, I was really nervous about going through the reception line. It was a graveside service. And I asked my mom, what do I do or say? Shake a hand, give a hug, nothing. And I have always remembered that because she learned from her bad experience. I've now learned from my bad experience. So for anybody listening out there, one of the simplest and best things you can do is a hug, a handshake, and I'm sorry, and nothing else. The silence is perfect. They know your heart. They know why you're there. They know you love them, and they know there are no words.
How about the person that gives you just a little memory, like something that they remember?
That's
about
awesome.
that person.
That's great. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah. So, Rhett's friends or even adults that maybe had a picture of him on their phone or a text message from him that might have been funny or something. Yeah, you're right. If you've got something like that, now that's a gift. That's a gift.
Yeah, 7.5 years later, if somebody randomly texted you a picture that they found on an old camera or something.
What a gift.
So don't be shy to send it.
Or a story they've been holding on to, and they're like, you're never going to believe what your son did.
Those are
Yeah.
priceless, priceless. Whether you give it 2 days afterwards or 7.5 years later, you're exactly right, priceless.
So when in doubt, a memory of some sort about that person, not about like you,
Yeah.
but about the person who has passed. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
What about food? I know we've talked about this in the documentary that people will show up.
Bring all the casseroles.
Yes, the food and casseroles and, and not just the 1 or 2 days after, but for how long? What's appropriate?
Well, again, speaking from experience and from a person who loves to eat, maybe my appetite would have been lost for a few days after Rhett's death. But again, I think food is a universal message of, I see you, I care for you. So, yes, the food immediately following, if there's a central place where you can bring it, great. But you bring up a great point. I'm telling you, that food a month later, 2 months later, I've told the story I'll never forget where the gentleman shows up on our door 6 weeks later with a sack of Chick-fil-A. And he rings the doorbell and he says, you know what, I was just thinking about y'all today. And I didn't know what else to do, so I just ran by Chick-fil-A and filled this thing up with nuggets. Wow. And you go, wow.
But was
Someone
it the
was
food?
thinking, no, it wasn't the food. It could have been a bag of kitty litter,
Oh,
but
no.
something that bad. But it's the thought.
I thought
It was not the food, but everybody loves Chick-fil-A, so he even put a little thought into that. But I thought, man, how cool is that? And so I think that's something we've tried to adopt with Archway. It's you don't have to rush in right then. It's what happens in the days, the weeks, the months, the years that follow.
Well, because what does happen from a person who's lived it? What does happen as the days go by, the weeks go by?
Everybody forgets. Everybody goes away. Yeah, again, probably another podcast, but the idea of, as a parent or anybody who's lost someone too soon, you're immediately, in the weeks and the days that go by, you're thinking, hey, wait a second, how does the rest of the world just go on? Everybody's supposed to stop and stop forevermore. My life has come unwound. Everybody else's is supposed to also. And so any memory, anything you can get, any acknowledgement you can give sometime later, man, it really is held special.
How about, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'm sorry. That's one of the simple things Archway does is when we find out about a tragic loss, and we may purposely wait 4 to 8 weeks or whatever and send a little condolence card and a simple $25 or so gift card. And it's not about the amount, and Jimmy's vouched for this thought. It's not about the amount. It's the fact that we send you something and say, we remember, grab a pizza, grab a couple of burgers or something, and we see you. And it's later on when it's not expected. And then we also send a birthday card and a Heaven Day card to that family to just remind, hey, we're still with you. We remember. And the feedback we've gotten from those little acts of kindness have been amazing. And it's so simple.
But is seeing a person simple? When you take the time to really see somebody, that...
Yeah, that's not simple. No. There's nothing simple about that.
Yeah, I see you and I'm here with you, even months, years, a decade later. I know and acknowledge that you've been through something. The importance, and depth within that. And talk about a connecting experience. That's something that connects you forever. And that's what makes the mission of Archway so important, right? Yeah. Is you're extending that. You're extending that olive branch to these people and telling them, I see you and I recognize that you're going through something.
I think you've touched on one of the biggest pieces of what we hope to accomplish, is that in the years that go by beyond that tragic loss of someone too soon, we let them know exactly that. You are remembered. We see you. You are, and your loved one is not forgotten. That's what we all want. We want to know that everybody else knows that, in my case, Rhett's not forgotten. And it's the same, I'm convinced, it's universal for every other parent as well. Don't forget my son or daughter.
And your grief is not forgotten.
Yeah.
We recognize that you're still grieving and that you're going to feel the impact of this forever. You know, it might be different as time goes on, but it's still a heavy, heavy space within you, you know, that you keep forever.
Yeah.
So
I have a question going back to the subject of what to ask, what not, what to say, what not to say. One of the things when I first dove into doing the documentary with Lorna was like, it's really important. I wanted to know the story of other people, what happened, and the details. So an example that I might ask is, if I find out about Rhett, I'm truly sorry. If I follow up with the question of, so what happened? Is that good, bad, avoid it?
Or does it matter in the time that you do that? Like, what is the time from the actual date that it occurred?
Yeah, I guess part of my question is it therapeutic for the person? So if I would have asked you what happened, or Lorna, or whatever, is that do not do that? Is it a timing thing?
Or is it the way you ask it?
Yeah.
Or the intent of what you're asking. That brings us back, right?
Sure.
And that's a court of law thing, right? What was the intent behind the action, right? Yeah. If it was to do harm, then we've got a problem here. But if somebody authentically is really trying to like just find out and be with you in that moment and support you, that feels a lot different than information seeking, so that I can then purport it to all the other people.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know, Chip, you brought that up a couple of times, so I know you're always digging around that issue, because Lorna really likes to know the details of what happened when she gets what she feels is permission from another mother to talk about it. On the other hand, I've never really cared to know what the details are of others. So I think if you are inclined to ask and you want to know, then yes, but then it does become a timing issue.
Yeah.
Because on one hand, you're exactly right. It becomes like, well, I'm just snooping and I need it for my own self-fulfillment. And Lord, we hope it's not gossip. So if time passes and that's part of, you think you've got the, tread lightly is all I would say. And the time would need to pass before you ask someone, so tell me about the details of your son, or and even, you probably have a good answer to this now. And doing the documentaries and being intimately involved in those, you probably know when it's okay to ask one of your interviewees, is it okay for me to ask? I need to know the details.
Sure. What we have learned through multiple documentaries now is that if you don't get clarity, people make up their own versions of what happened. And in these documentaries, especially the one we're showing Friday with Jackson, there's 8 years later, there's different stories of what happened during the night of the event. And
interesting.
And it just is coming to light because we've interviewed multiple people. And in this documentary, it's a brother accidentally shot and killed his brother at a family hunting lodge. And there's been multiple misinformation about what exactly happened that night. And that story's been told over and over again by multiple people. But when we interviewed his brother, who actually was there and a part of it, the clarity of what actually happened now is shown in the documentary. And it's amazing how many people come up afterwards and say, I had no idea how other people felt, what they saw, the clarity has helped in the healing process for some.
Well, and you have to remember, again, that's that trauma brain. So that you're experiencing that trauma too, especially in that circumstance. that perception can be very skewed and misunderstood from all parties, but especially there's a lot of studies out there that talk about like eyewitnesses to things and like how much do they really remember, and how acutely can they remember those details, those really nitty gritty details, and how much of it also can be like a confabulation where they're filling in the gaps of information that they can't remember, or sensationalism where they're trying to make it a bigger, better story than it already was on its own. There's a lot of components to that can add into it. And then, it's that simple game of train. Like if I whisper to you and you can't hear every word and then you go and whisper it, to Chip and then Chip whispers it to Jimmy, by the time it gets back around, it is such a night and day difference of what we all had. And we each had the opportunity to hear it. But the first person who told it, by the time it gets around and dialect or wording or forgetfulness or the way somebody words it or even the intonation and inflection that they put on each word can change the whole thing by the time it gets to the end.
Yeah, I've, again, through thousands of interviews now, I've picked up on occasion, when asked about the details, some will lean towards justification of why it wasn't their fault with a hint of why others dropped the ball.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's intentional or subconscious. It's, well, let me tell you what happened from my perspective. There's, this should have happened, but it didn't. But on my end, this is what I did to try and overcompensate for the lack of responsibility of others or whatever it might be. And whether it's intentional or not intentional, I'm not really sure. It's not my place to judge it, but it is interesting how we tell a story over and over again to make ourselves feel better about the experience, and sometimes it's at the expense of someone else.
Well, we can be selfish. We're humans.
Yes, exactly.
But I do have a saying that I think of often, which is, your perception is your reality. So the way that you perceive something to be becomes your reality, which really it needs to be a divided, comment. Your perception is your perception. Your perception is your perception, but somewhere in the middle lies the reality of it. So.
Well, and getting back to what you were talking about, and really one of the overall purposes of Archway is when we as parents, when we hear somebody else's story about that tragic event, there is some comfort to that. I don't know why it is, but I know Lauren and I have asked multiple people, so tell us what you remember about the day. People that obviously were not there, but how did they first learn about it? What do they remember? I don't know why, but there is some comfort into hearing others tell the story. And maybe it's just because they're talking about your kid. Maybe they're talking about your loved one, and that feels comforting. I don't know, but we have spent time asking lots of folks, so how did you first hear?
And now you can handle that. But right at the beginning, that would be that timely aspect of it. You couldn't have, received that the same way that you can now.
Yeah, but that's part of the storytelling that I think really adds value and brings value to what Archway does.
So what if we flipped it around and said, if I said, Jimmy, I'm so sorry, what can I do to help? Is that a reasonable question, or would somebody a day or two in say, nothing? What do you mean, what can you do to help? How can you bring Rhett back? I mean, is it an appropriate thing to ask? Is it?
That's, we all almost automatically spit that out. So a couple of things. If you're going to really ask, what can I do to help? I would say already have something in mind that you are going to do to help. Or even better yet, don't even ask the question and just do something. And that's what, again, we found so amazing from some of the people is we were never asked the question and people just began to do things. Now, again, if they believe they needed to ask permission before they did some things, then they asked, but the bringing of the food, the common thing, the bringing of the food much later,
the mowing
of the grass, just showing up and
cleaning your pool. Taking your kids somewhere, the surviving children.
That's correct. So all the things that reasonably intelligent people, there are things that need to be done that you don't have to ask permission for. And so instead of saying, is there anything I can do? Just do something. It can be really small. Just do something. It's huge. And flowers and all that are greatly appreciated still. They really are. Days, maybe weeks later, you'll happen to run back through and look at all the flower cards list, and you'll see people and you'll be kind of shocked and amazed and smile about, wow, this person from that far away, it's, so all those things that people do still matter and are still important.
How about the people that come around later and say, would you like to go do something? And you turn them down because you're just not in the place where you can do that. Should they stop and wait for you to come back to them, or should they keep asking and keep asking?
I would say let a little more time pass and ask again. I really would, because they'll take you up on it. They really will. At some point, you will decide to get up and go. But one thing you won't ever do is, it's unlikely that you're ever going to get the phone call from that person saying, hey, remember when I gave you a rain check? I'll cash that rain check now. That almost never happens. So
you have to come back around to circle back around
and ask again.
And then when you do go, what's appropriate to say and not say, and how does that conversation go? Do you speak of what their experiences have been and what they've been feeling, as a friend to them or acquaintance? Or do you just talk about everything else but?
Nah, I think you
leave the purple elephant in the corner, or call it out to eat with you.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it, but I think you call it out. Because I think, again, what you're going to find is most parents, especially after time has passed, they're going to want to talk about it. It's therapeutic to talk about what happened, to talk about their child. For most, I will never say all. I can speak from my experience and from a lot of others who I've had the conversation with. They want to talk about it. And that's what, again, one of the worst things we can do is try to act like that it didn't happen.
Yeah.
And they'll let you know too. If you will listen, if you really will be about the business of listening, people will let you know what they want to talk about or what's off limits. And sometimes you just step in it. Sometimes you say something, or you go to a place and you realize, okay, there's a wall there. Let me back up. I mean, if you really want to help, because helping can be tough business, but if you really want to help, they'll guide you on how to help them the best. And if they're in a place and you're in a conversation and they bring up some things, well, then you can ask questions about that, or you can have a conversation, and then they'll kind of let you know when it's time to stop. It's awkward. It's not easy, but it's something you can do if you really want to help.
So maybe following the lead of the person that has experienced the traumatic event.
A lot of the time.
I think Paul exactly right. Picking up a few context clues and
Which means you got to remember, it's not about me. This is about them. How can I help?
Actively listening, right?
Yeah.
Not passively listening so that you can get whatever you want accomplished in that, but actively hearing what they're saying and then using that as the next segue into a comment or a question or checking in or sharing a memory,
So I want to get back to one thing that I heard earlier when we're talking about what to say or not to say. And this is on the heels of us going to watch Jackson and his documentary. So again, big picture of why Archway exists. Lorna, again, very helpful through a friend of a friend of a friend. Lorna got notice that said, hey, you need to call this mother. This mother has been through something similar to what you have. I'm just giving you the name. I think she might could help you. And this is just a mother who's lost someone. This is Renee. She lost Jackson. She's not a counselor. She's not trained to do anything. Lorna picks up the phone. They don't talk much. But the lady told Lorna, you can make it. I made it and you made it. And that's all Lorna needed to hear. And so to this day, she will tell you that's the lady that first saved my life. From just someone passing on, pick up the phone and call this lady. And there was not much that needed to be said, just other than, you can make it. And when Lorna heard those words, I'm telling you, she will tell you to this day, Renee saved my life.
Not how or why
Nope.
you're going to make it, but
Nope.
you will make it.
That's right.
Simple.
That's right. And in silence, not a lot of words need to be shared. But again, it's that connection of what I hope we are doing, and that is people who have walked this path trying to leave some footprints for those coming behind us.
I'm hearing the less you say is almost better. And the being present and understanding it's not about you, it's about them is the key.
Well, you definitely lessen the likelihood of saying the wrong thing.
That's true. Over talking to make them feel better probably will backfire.
Which is that nervous energy, so.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for that, and that is say little. You're right.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. You can like and share, would be awesome. Visit us at our website, archwayofhope.org. We're on all social channels. You can follow us there. Our intent is to share solid information with people that are needing to hear this information and provide hope for those who have lost someone too early.